Okay, great. All right. So, talk to me about Mexico.
Okay, Mexico is a very...
Talk loud.
Okay, Mexico is a very interesting place. It really has its ups and downs, and the people of Mexico have always been suspicious of their presidents because the presidents always leave, and then afterwards the treasury is a lot lighter.
They've depleted they get rich at the expense of the general public.
There have only been a few presidents that have been heroes. President Cardenas, which nationalized all the oil companies and took all the oil away from Shell and Standard and they gave it to Mexico, was a big hero. And
Benito Juarez
Benito Juarez,
was kind of like the Abraham Lincoln of Mexico.
he was a little Indian guy. He really believed in law and order, and he had some real principles. But then there's the dark side of Mexico, and you can see it in Benito Juarez. He had principles. He believed the government should be run by law and not by brute power. So he sent all his troops home, and the next day one of his generals that hadn't sent all his troops home came into the presidential palace and shot him. And there's always been that dark side to Mexico. There was great hope in the last presidential election. Colosio was a great man for Mexico. One of the young, one of the prime young people of Mexico, the hope of Mexico.
He really had a heart for the poor. He had worked with Solidaridad to help with meeting the needs of the poor. He wasn't just looking out for the wealthy.
Yeah. He didn't have a chauffeur. He drove his own car. When he flew in airplanes, he rode coach. And he wandered around and talked to the people one-to-one, which was ultimately his undoing when he was assassinated right here in Tijuana. The president that had named him as the next candidate, Salinas, had been a hope for Mexico also, because everyone saw him as someone who was going to reform Mexico economically and bring Mexico back onto her feet. And it turned out, with the assassination of Colosio, with the new president, Zedillo, that when they went and counted the treasure again after Salinas had left, once again, it was a lot lighter than it should have been. And later they find out that Salinas' brother has a bank account in Switzerland with $800 million in it. And also, it looks like a lot of the drug interests that were in Colombia have now moved to Mexico. And everybody has their theory about what the president did know or didn't know. At any rate, there was great hope, and then because there was so much great hope, now just so much feeling of betrayal, feeling that of cynicism. Okay? But Mexicans keep on going on. They're good at that, and as long as they have their tortillas in the morning, they probably won't revolt. Yeah.
What about economically?
How long has it been since the peso was devalued? For a long time, Salinas had kept it at 3 pesos to the dollar, or it was 3,000 pesos to the dollar, and then they got rid of those extra 3 zeros.
Right, and they made the new peso. It was too embarrassing having thousands and thousands of pesos to the dollar, so they took off 3 zeros and called them new pesos. So instead of 3,000 pesos to the dollar, suddenly it was only 3 new pesos to the dollar. And then with all the upheaval with the economy, with Colosio being assassinated, the peso suddenly went to 7.5 now, new pesos to the dollar. And with that, a lot of people's hopes, a lot of people's savings, particularly hitting the poor person, because
Not only was their money worth less, but then inflation, prices went up. So what they had was doubly
yeah,
worthless.
it really isn't a terrible blow to the middle-class businessman, because suddenly they're selling their product for less and maybe exporting more. But to the wage earner, suddenly his wages are cut in two. They did give salary increases, but not as much as they lost. And so suddenly the wage earner gets hit, the small guy. The guy that had all his savings in a can underneath his bed, and suddenly only half of that is what it was before. And, the poor guy on the street is making, how much a day now?
I don't remember what the going rate is. Isn't it like $50 a week?
Yeah, it's like $50 a week.
50, 60 a week.
And that's above average. I think 40 is more like the minimum wage a week. $1 an hour.
Tell me about Tijuana. I'm a outsider, and I want to know something about it.
Well, Tijuana has just exploded in size. Tijuana is right here right on the border between California and Mexico, on the Pacific coast, and it comes right up next to San Diego. And people have come from all over Mexico. Indians, people from Mexico City, people from Guadalajara, all come up to the border looking for jobs, because there are a lot more jobs here and a lot more money, even though what Greg was describing, how it might be $40 a week salary. That's better than they were doing in another part of Mexico. So you see a lot of people coming, partly for the jobs in the maquiladores, partly for other work, and a lot with the hope of crossing the border and finding a better life. But I don't think everybody who comes to Tijuana comes with that objective. We've met a lot of people who are just glad to be here. And we find that Tijuana is an exciting mission field, because there's a lot of people who are here and they've kind of been pulled away from their roots, maybe the strong traditionalism of Catholicism, the strong family ties. You see people who are lonely here, whose lives have gotten messed up in drugs and alcohol, or stealing as a way of life. And so you see a lot of needy people who maybe have lost their structure that maybe kept them held together, and now people need the Lord, and they are more open to spiritual things here than they might have been in their hometown back in mainland Mexico.
You can kind of, in some ways, it's sort of like when in the United States, during the era of industrialization, when all the people left the farms and went to the big cities. And people were much more open to change. And but also they're losing their identities from their families and their hometowns. And so they're much more liable to fall into the vices
Right.
and lose their way.
It's a tremendous load for people to carry. Traditionally and today here too, you see a lot of big families, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 kids, which was okay when you had a rancho and you needed a lot of hands to do the work. But here, when you can barely get enough money to feed a few people, Mexicans have a saying, donde uno puede comer, 10 pueden comer. Where one can eat, 10 can eat. But it's not true. Even if you have a big heart, it's hard to divide up the food that far. And so you get families coming, and there's too many mouths to feed. The father maybe does his best trying to get a job, but the harder he works, the less his money is worth, and the more mouths there are to feed, and they get discouraged, and that's when maybe someone invites them to go out drinking, and they drink up their week's salary, and then they feel even worse, and then they don't even want to go home. So one thing that really grieves me here is the plight of the Mexican women and children whose husbands have abandoned them. The fathers are gone, and the wives are left with 5 children to try to put through school and keep clothes on their back, food in their mouths, and education kind of goes out the window when they don't have enough to buy the books or the book bags or pay the tuition,
Or the uniform.
the uniforms. So I really feel for the Mexican women, and I know so many of them.
I'm going to put a book in front of this door, so in case it blows a little bit.
Okay?
Maybe wedge it under there.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's a good start. How you feel?
Comfortable.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we doing okay? Loud
We're doing
enough?
terrific. Well, I hope so. I won't know exactly now if it's loud enough, but I think it is loud enough. Just
Okay.
talk loud. Great. Why don't you go back to your, when you first came to Tijuana and your one-day visit and what it was like and how you got into this thing.
Okay. In some ways, the story of our missionary life is the story of our marriage,
Mm-hmm.
because we married each other because we both wanted to be missionaries. Kathy wanted to be a missionary to China, and I wanted to be a missionary to Mexico.
But we did want to go together.
And so, other than the fact that I had decided that I could never learn Chinese, I had to convince Kathy that she would be happy in Mexico. And so, even before we got married,
Engaged?
even before we got engaged, we came down to Mexico together on a one-day trip with another ministry to see if how we would react together to Mexico.
And it was a powerful day. I still remember getting up early and meeting at the Spectrum parking lot, and we stood around while Pastor Vaughn gave a little background to what we would be seeing and a little talk about the culture, and told us to watch our wallets, and these kids are streetwise. So we got the orientation, and then we went down to the market where store owners come and buy produce in bulk to sell, and we, through Spectrum, they loaded up on bags of onions and tomatoes and fruit and beans and rice and all kinds of things. And it was an interesting, colorful market, so we browsed around, and we decided to chip in so they could buy a great big box of eggs and some bags of flour to add to the distribution. And it wasn't very much, but it made us feel part of what was going on. And then we went to a really poor barrio where there was dirt and flies and children running around barefoot. I remember my job was helping with the girls' bath, and how dirty the water was, and the kids had to go in and all share the same dirty water. I think I helped comb out hair after kids had been deliced, and tried to remember not to accidentally comb my hair with the same comb. I remember I got a good picture of 2 little kids who were twins, and they shared the same big wash tub. They were being bathed in a big wash tub that the women here use to wash out their clothes by hand. And then we helped with some of the games, and we helped hand out fruit bags. And I think what impacted me so much that night, we came back and we went out for supper with some friends of ours. And what we spent on supper, I don't know, $30 for
Mhm.
pizza, was what had fed maybe 5 or 6 families in Mexico. And I was just struck with how much we have and how great the needs are. And I guess it was the first time I had seen Mexican poverty. Um,
And so she was willing to go to Mexico.
yeah, the next day Greg proposed and I
Yes.
accepted. And I think his argument about I could probably learn Spanish, but he didn't think he'd ever get Chinese down, and it wasn't fair that I had grown up in Taiwan and already knew Chinese to take him into that setting. So we thought, I don't know, for some reason that was a convincing argument to me.
Yes.
I realized there was a lot to be done here as well as in the Orient.
I caught her at a soft moment. And so we decided to go to Mexico. And we also decided to get married. And so we got married, and we got a house to live in the United States, to house sit for 6 months. And it was a very big house. It had 7 bedrooms, and people warned us that this was the wrong thing for a newlywed husband to do, because I would never be able to do this again for my bride. At any rate, we lived there for 6 months, and the house sitting job was up, and we were going to have to either rent a place or buy a house. And we were afraid of getting stuck in the United States, and so at 6 months into our marriage, we left for Guadalajara to become missionaries, independent missionaries. We didn't even have a mission. We just mission organization. We just had a mission, a desire to go down, learn the language, and help some friends of ours that were down in Guadalajara. And so we just took off. And thinking back on it, Kathy must have had a lot of confidence in me, her insane husband.
We were kind of naive, but we figured we needed to learn Spanish. We didn't know what mission board we wanted to work with. We thought we'd just go down and see what it was like.
Yeah.
And after a while, we decided being independent missionaries wasn't such a great idea for us. We needed a little more accountability, and we wanted a team to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so we came back up here to Tijuana and to San Diego to visit
Mm-hmm.
some of the organizations and talk to missionaries and find out who we might align ourselves with.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up aligning ourselves with Spectrum, the group that we had gone across the border with for one day. And this is kind of an aside, but this is one of the reasons I really enjoy having short-term teams come. We get a lot of them in the summer. It's so good to help them open their eyes and be hit in the face with a completely new cultural experience and to see those needs, because I remember what an impact it made on our lives. And we were not impressionable junior high students. We had seen a lot and traveled a bit, and yet I know how it turned our lives around. So I'm really glad that we have the chance to, as part of our ministry, invest our lives in young people's lives who, maybe this is going to be an important pivotal point in their lives as far as openness to what God wants them to do with missions or with
Mm-hmm.
serving others.
Talk about STT for a while and what your goals are and what you do with people, and what they do, and what you accomplish.
Well, probably first we need to mention that we did only sign up with Spectrum on a short-term basis.
Mm-hmm.
And later we did join Latin American Mission. And we had short-term teams coming down all the time, actually, even from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Work teams, people who wanted to just come across, help build some houses,
We worked
get
with,
their feet wet.
Yeah, we worked with a lot of poor people, and churches would get together enough money to build a house, and they bring down the people and send the money, and we'd buy the material, and we'd get together people from our church, and we'd go out and build a poor family a house.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the beginning work teams. That was a basic routine in those first years. And But after a while, that matured with the area where we're at, because the people, after a while, all the places where you could put a house had a house.
And even though there were still people who needed a house, there was no land available to build it.
Uh-huh.
So we began to look around for what else could a work team do.
Uh-huh. And also our ministries began to change too, you know, and our outlook on what we were doing, you know, instead of just helping people to just survive, you know, we were trying to get in to a different kind of ministry.
What do they do now? What are you doing now with?
Well, we have, there's still construction. It might be on a church building,
Mhm.
a Sunday school room. A present one is helping build an orphanage for a pastor who has a great heart and a great vision for ministering to street children. And he's got a school going too. So we've had the teams, part of their time has been spent doing construction, and part of the time maybe a vacation Bible school or prayer walks, visiting, doing some mime and song, and just participating with local congregations. They might, it depends, if they don't have very much money, they might come down and dig an outhouse. Because we still need outhouses. The city doesn't have complete sewage system yet. What else do they do?
Well, and a lot of them work with evangelism
Mhm.
and with working with children's work, also with outreaches to people in the different neighborhoods. A lot of teams these days know how to do dramas and mimes, which is
Puppet
great.
shows.
Puppet shows, because these things sort of transcend the language problem, and you can get across a mime in any language. Yeah.
We've done parties for children, you know, with games and music and piñatas, food.
Mhm.
It's not usually hard to get a crowd of kids together, and then you can share with them. So, sometimes we've had teams come down and do crafts together with the junior high age kids or the younger kids. There's a lot to be done, and our goal is to not just put them to work pounding nails, but to help them build relationships with people down here, whether it's with the children or with families they eat with or stay with.
Mhm.
Good. Let's keep talking about relationships, and why don't you talk about church? Some of the things you've seen in church and how you work in church. Maybe reminisce about how you got involved
Okay.
to be doing the things in church you do.
Well, that was one reason we left Spectrum, actually.
Yeah, one of the reasons we left Spectrum was that Spectrum had a ministry to poor children in 4 different locations in Tijuana. And so one week we'd be here, one week we would be there, then there, then there.
And always with huge crowds of people. And we never really got to know any of the people by name or any of the children, although we saw the same faces over and over. But
Mhm.
we felt like we were meeting needs maybe, but they were surface needs, and we weren't getting to know the people. And we weren't getting to share heart to heart. And so we began to, we hooked up with another missionary named Rick Johnson, who was pastoring a church in Grupo, and he needed some help.
Mhm.
So we thought, yeah, we'd rather work with a local church and be able to get to know people, build more relationships, disciple people, so that they in turn could reach many more people than we could reach.
Mhm. And so with that decision to work with a local church, also was the seeds of our work with the drug rehabilitation program. Because when we began working with the local church, when I first came to Mexico, I had a high plan that I was going to come down, and just as they have schools in the United States to teach Bible and the liberal arts, the liberal arts Bible school, I was going to start a vocational Bible school in Mexico. And I was going to get the very best young people of Mexico and teach them vocations and the Bible and sent them out as tent-making pastors and missionaries. And this was what I was going to do. The Lord had different plans. When I came down here and we decided to work with the local church, I had to change my attitude and just say, what do you want me to do? And I'm available. Yeah. And what happened is that the church people had a real heart for alcoholics. And they would go downtown and bring back these guys from the streets to the church. And when I would get to the church in the morning, there'd be all these guys with red eyes and some of them looking around wondering how they got there. And all the people brought them to the church. And then they left them there and went home. And these guys
for them to do?
would wander around for a while and then go back to the street. Okay. They would get, like food and some new clothes, But it became obvious to me that there was a program that needed to be had. The church had a program before that they had worked on, but when I got there, it was one of those times when that program had phased out and there wasn't much going on. And
The pastor was really too busy with other things to be able to dedicate much time.
to that. And so I said, look, we need to start a rehabilitation program. And I'll teach the guys a trade. So the pastor said, well, let's think about this for 6 months. And I said, no, we're going to start today. And I got an old tarp and hung it up in front of the church to keep off the sun, and got what guys were hanging around the church and started to teach them to make things out of wood. And I borrowed woodworking tools. Our first saw, usually they have a radial arm saw for cutting a square. Well, we didn't have anything but a skill saw. And so we made a table, and I put a 2x4 on the table that went up and down, and we put the wood underneath, and we just ran the skill saw across this table that had a slot through the middle. And that was our first radial arm saw. And the first guys that I taught to do woodworking, I had to tell them over and over and over again how to do the simplest thing. One of our first products was a tortilla press.
Can I get one?
And it was a great product because you have to sand a lot. So these guys that really didn't know where they were at, they could at least rub the sandpaper on the wood. And then they would make these tortilla presses. They're made like this. You put some dough in here and put some wax paper and some dough. Then you push this down, and then you press this down until you got the tortilla. And it's really flat. And this was their product. And
You got donated wood, right?
we got donated wood. At the beginning, we even glued all the wood together because it was just donated 2x4s, so we had to make it fatter. And it was so hard to teach the first two guys, Carlos and Martin. I could say sand, then they would sand. And I would come back hours later, and they would be sitting there looking at the wood, and I'd say, cut. And then they would do a cut, Or I'd say, put on the hinge. And they would start to put on 1 screw, 2 screws, and then I would walk in the back of the church to do something, and I would come back. They still wouldn't have the 3rd screw in. I'd say, put in the 3rd screw. Oh, the 3rd screw. It took me months and months and months, but finally, these two guys, Carlos and Martin, could make a tortilla press. And also during that time, they had gone to church, they had learned about the Lord, they accepted the Lord. And their lives were changing. And at the end of the first year, we had our first two graduates, Carlos and Martine, both of which had decided to stay with the program and make it their own ministry. And so that's how the program got started. These first two guys, Carlos and Martine, learned how to make the tortilla press, accepted the Lord, and decided to minister to other people in the same situation that they were in. So,
Yep, and it was one of the guys in Spectrum, Efren, who came
Yeah.
up with this design.
yeah, he let us use his design for a tortilla press.
And Martin is now on his own, but he's still making tortilla presses. It's been a great product.
Right.
You'd think the market would be flooded, but it's not
Yes.
yet.
Martine proceeded to learn how to make cabinets. He got married. He has a family, he has children, and he currently makes a living making tortilla presses. And but the program has matured, you know, and currently it's gone through a new cycle where we've had to renovate it. And Dan Young, another LAM missionary, is helping us, and Pastor Juan from the Emmanuel Church. Him and Dan are working together on a renewed version of the rehab center right now, and they can really use your prayers. I still work with the rehab center and with Dan and with Juan, but my vision now has entered a second step. So,
Through
Let's wait on that for just
Okay.
just a couple minutes.
mhm.
Talk about moving into Grupo. Talk about building your house. Talk about
first living with a family.
yeah, living with a family, moving your house.
Mhm.
Talk about the. I know it's much later, but the truck story.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'll start with moving into Grupo.
Moving in the group.
When we first came from Guadalajara after studying some Spanish up here to Tijuana, we were looking again at Spectrum and thinking this might be a good fit. I was pregnant with Ian about 5 or 6 months along, and we stayed in a borrowed trailer in this parking lot of Spectrum, and it was a little difficult because there was no bathroom there. You had to climb over Greg and go on into the church to use the bathroom. And finally, we thought, well, we'd like to be in Mexico. All this going back and forth across the border isn't working very well. And so we asked around, and Rick helped locate a Mexican family that we could stay with for a little while. We wanted a little more true life experience. And so we moved in with Ninfa and her 3 children. Her husband was kind of in and out of the picture, but he was one of these guys who had a job on the other side of the border and sometimes came home with money, but usually came home drunk with nothing. And so we stayed with Ninfa for a while. Wonderful cook.
Very good
Um,
cook.
They had a 2-hole outhouse. They washed the clothes out on a scrub board. No running water,
Mhm.
no electricity. We used candles.
And no refrigeration, too.
No refrigeration.
Kathy would run out and wave at the ice truck in the morning to get the guy to stop, and he'd bring out this big brick of ice and he'd throw it in our cooler.
I still remember, well, I was kind of appalled at how much manteca she used. That's pork lard for cooking, and a lot of sugar. And so one day she was gone, and I thought I'd make this nutritious soup for her children. I went shopping and bought all these vegetables. And a friend of hers had stopped by with a little, some dried herb, and I thought, oh, that looks like it'd probably be good in the soup. So I made up this soup and threw all these vegetables and some meat in there, and threw this herb in too. And it was the worst thing you ever tasted. It was some kind of medicinal herb, I think, for curing who knows what. But the soup was impossible to eat, and the kids all made horrible faces. And I tried rinsing it off and changing the broth, but it only was useful for burying. And Ninfa and I still laugh about that. I think it was no improvement on her cooking.
Mhm.
Maybe no grease, but I wish you could all come down and taste Ninfa's mole.
Uh-huh.
Boy, she can
She's
really.
very good. But also, not too long after that, in that time period, we built a house up in Grupo. And
Mhm.
all the people in the church wanted us to build our house in their backyard. And they were all squatters. And later the government would legalize the ground and they could buy it. But they were all squatters. And so we would become a squatter on top of a squatter.
No, we were renting. from
Well,
a
we were
squatter.
renting from a squatter.
We
Okay.
paid rent.
We paid rent. So we were renting from a squatter. And so I came up with the design for the house, that I would make the whole house out of panels that are plywood framed in 2x4s, and that we would just screw the panels together, just in case we would ever have to move from this secure situation. And lo and behold, it seems funny, but even though we loved Nympha and she loved us, she didn't have a husband. And one day the man that sold water decided to move in and park his water truck in her backyard and spend all day at her house, and only go back to his own family at night. And we felt that we didn't want to give a positive nod to that, and so on giving a negative nod, her new boyfriend kicked us out.
It was pretty awkward.
Yeah.
So we decided it was time to stop renting from a squatter and start looking for our own land. But living in that house was really an eye-opening experience. We wanted to live there because we wanted to be there with the people. But I discovered washing my clothes on a scrub board, trying to cook with the only refrigeration being a cooler, and you'd have to be sure you caught the Iceman and
Mhm.
got a chunk of ice to go in the cooler. And then I had two small children. Ian was, I don't know, they were maybe 2 and 3 or...
Yeah, and it wasn't a real healthy thing for the kids.
Oh,
Sometimes
flies
we'd find them out in the back inside the chicken coop.
I remember one time we found a hypodermic needle right outside off of our step. It was all dirt there, no grass.
You could have stepped on it with your foot.
Yeah.
Because here in Mexico, you can buy syringes right at the drugstore.
Everybody just
And so everybody just
gives
throws them
Yeah.
away in the street. And so they're
So-
all over the place. And the kids play with them.
Yeah. And then,
Yeah.
we had wanted to live there to be with the people, and
Mhm.
but all my time was spent trying to cook, trying to clean. It was
Mhm.
an impossible fight with dust. Trying to wash clothes.
Mhm. So it just turned out really,
Yeah.
it was good for a short time to be a good lesson. It showed us
How hard it is.
how
for
hard
people
it
to live.
was for people to live there. And it gave us a new appreciation for the people that came to church, that even
Yeah.
found time to come to church, and that even on top of that had some energy left over to do some evangelization or some additional work for the Lord. It showed
Yeah.
the amount of dedication that people had. And also it was during that time that we had the case of the runaway pickup truck.
Yeah, you got to tell them that.
Okay. Where we were at Memphis is right on a borderline between Grupo Mexico and the next little section or neighborhood called Emperadores. And we really felt that now people were moving into Emperadores, the church should have an outreach to these people. And so we told everybody at church, said, look, you need to go out past Grupo, past your little burg, into the next burg, and witness for the Lord. And
Nobody went.
Nobody went. And so I told my wife that she should go. And she didn't go. And of course the Lord was telling me to go all the time, and I didn't go. And so this is how it happened that our pickup truck went without us. Because the only electricity we had was the battery of the truck. We had 2 batteries. And so we used one battery in the house for electricity and one battery recharging in the truck. So we would run the battery down on the DC lights in the house, take it out of the house, take the good battery that had been charging in the truck, put it back in the house, put the bad battery in the truck. But of course, then the truck wouldn't start.
But fortunately, it was,
It was on a downhill.
right, and you could jump start it.
Yeah, and you could jump start it. So this hill, he had to go out and then turn and then go down the hill to get it started. But if you should go straight, it was a big downhill garbage dump that went down and down through tin cans and sheet metal and old stoves and bed springs and tires. And then right at the end of all that, there was a couple living in a little trailer. They were our nearest neighbors in Emperadores, where the Lord had told me to go and witness, and I hadn't. But so we changed the batteries, and we put the old battery in the truck. It wouldn't start. I tried to push the truck with Kathy steering,
No.
but
No, you said, you push, Kathy.
oh, she tried.
I tried to push, but that
She
didn't do
couldn't get
anything.
started.
we
So
tried-
I jumped out, and we were both pushing the truck to get it out the gate and then rolling down the hill, the road hill, part of the hill. And there was just this little bump, and we just couldn't get it over the bump. But then when we finally got it over the bump,
Both pushing.
both pushing, there was nobody steering. And it started going down the junkyard hill as fast as it could go. And I tried to run around the front end of it and jump in the driver's seat, and I tripped and I fell, and the truck just missed me. Kathy ran from the back on the side, and the truck was going with the doors were both open, and it was looking like the Flying Nun, going like this, and Kathy jumped in the truck when this door was up, so she jumped in the truck, and when the truck came back down, it came down so hard that it threw her right back out of the truck again. And right across all this garbage and old tin cans and
Broken glass.
broken glass, and she had shorts on.
Weeds.
And she got just hundreds of little cuts on her leg. And so I picked myself up and looked at this.
Well, wait, did the truck stop?
No, it just kept on going down, and it was heading straight towards the little trailer where the people lived at the bottom, and they were eating breakfast, and they looked out the window and they see this driverless truck coming right at them, and they jump up all asustado and ran out of their little trailer so they wouldn't be killed, and I think at that point, I think the angels must have caught the truck, because there was a bed spring with a bunch of tires, and it hit the bed spring and it stopped. And if you know you got that much tonnage going that fast downhill, it just doesn't stop like that. So there we were, looking down there, and the people in the trailer were looking up at us, and Kathy went
I
back
limped
to
home to nurse my
to
wound.
nurse her wound. And I looked around, and there were all the neighbors standing out in their yards looking at us. And then I turned around, and I went back, and I got Kathy, and I said, "Look, Kathy, I know you want to wash your wounds, but forget it. Come with me. You're coming with me now." And she must have really thought I was crazy now. And I said, "Look, Kathy, we got their attention."
I didn't really want to obey at that moment, but I'm glad the Lord helped me. because we really did get a chance to meet the people
Who pulled the truck out of the hole, and we got the family that lived in the trailer invited us over. They gave
they
us
were all concerned about me.
about
and
her and her leg,
They gave us a drink of
and
water.
they gave us a drink of water. And it turned out that the family, the mother was a Christian, the father wasn't a Christian, had a bad drinking habit, and the kids weren't really Christians either. And we invited them up for supper the next week.
Yeah, they were pretty curious about us, so they came.
and then after that, we invited them to church, and they came.
No, the mother came.
The mother
and
came.
the daughter came.
And the
She came
daughter
to
came.
my girls' Sunday school class.
Right. And the daughter accepted the Lord.
Yeah.
And later, the daughter died of lupus, and it was just a real sad,
12-year-old girl. Yeah.
sad case. But through her death, the father's heart softened, and he accepted the Lord. And he became a real dynamic Christian.
Yeah, became one of the deacons in the church, and they contributed so much to the church.
Mm-hmm. And so we called the Ford our evangelistic pickup truck because it went when we didn't want to go.
Great story. I
Right.
love it. All right, good. Why don't you talk about church? You're talking about your Sunday school class. Talk about getting involved in church, and I'd like you both to talk about your Sunday school classes and maybe some other things you've done with the church, including how the rehab center maybe started in that church and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing.
Well, like we said, one of the things we were really concerned about was developing relationships with people in a church. Not necessarily church planting, but helping disciple people. And I guess my involvement started when I saw that lots and lots of people came to church, but all these little kids had to sit quietly through church. And sometimes the pastor would preach an hour or so. And if they would fidget, he'd reach over and kind of tap them with a stick. And so I wanted to get some kind of a children's church going. And I remember sometimes we'd have 60 or 70 kids all crammed into this back room. I'd play some songs on the guitar, and we'd get some of the other women involved. I remember God sent a wonderful friend who developed a lot of crafts, and she would send me box after box of materials with crafts that were all ready for the kids to put together. You know, she'd include the glue and the scissors, and the kids just loved it. All kinds of good ideas for teaching stories too, and that was a great way to train in some of the other women to be the storytellers and develop their teaching skills. So I started with Sunday school. And then shortly after that, the pastor, who was an American missionary, went off to South America for a year because he had an interest in helping a tribal group in the Amazon. And so he took off. He had just appointed a Mexican pastor, promising young guy, to be the pastor in his stead. So, but before the missionary, Rick, even got out of the country, this pastor quit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't hold out too long. And then some of the people were saying, well, why doesn't Greg become the next pastor? Why didn't you?
Well, the reason that I didn't become the pastor is because I really felt the Lord was calling the leadership up from inside the church. And before Rick left, he did appoint some elders,
Yeah,
And-
he had 7.
7 elders.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was some leadership in the church. And I really wanted to see that leadership blossom. And there was another missionary, Dave Burdett, that came on down and helped at that time too. Yeah. And so I really felt my role was to be supportive at that time. And through that time of turmoil for the church, one of the guys inside the church who had been a leader before did raise to the top to be the pastor, and he's the pastor now, Pastor Warren. And
But even before he showed up on the scene, there were three leaders. Some of them that had been appointed kind of fell by the wayside. But three leaders did emerge, and I remember Greg having weekly meetings with them, and between the three of them, they preached and they led the Wednesday night prayer meeting, and they ruled the church. And I don't think they could have done it if Greg hadn't been sitting there with them, and also with the deacons. He'd come home exhausted from these marathon meetings where, everybody would have their say about every little detail. But, even though it was hard, it was working. And that was Jorge and Jose
and Juan.
No, Juan wasn't one of them.
The deacons?
No, it was the three elders.
Oh, the three
Mhm.
elders. Okay.
Jorge, Juan, and Jose. No, Jorge, Jose, and...
Oh, it's Jorge Torres. Is
No? Oh, well.
Well,
But there were three guys, and that they were running the church pretty well. But then later Juan came on the scene, and I think he was the one that God had anointed for that job.
Mhm.
He was young, and he had had an active role when he was younger, but then he'd fallen into a pretty sinful lifestyle and just
Mhm.
had nothing to do with the Lord. But he had come back to the Lord and was repentant and really wanting to serve the Lord. Married with a little girl, and spoke both Spanish and English. And so God brought him in, and I think Greg was really a big help to the church in not taking over the leadership, but in encouraging them to serve the Lord and to do to obey Him and to lead their church. And to me, I don't know if you want to put this in or not, but I felt like it was a good example of how when we're weak, God can use us better, because you frankly didn't feel like you had the Spanish to take the leadership at that point, right?
Mhm. And so in some ways it was kind of helpful. It was kind of helpful that I wasn't real fluent, because then the people wouldn't expect me to take over. So in some ways, at that point, my lack of fluency was an asset.
Okay, why don't you go into your new plans? Go in.
I didn't really say anything about my Sunday school
Yeah.
class, and you didn't really say
No,
anything
should we
about yours.
should we say a few more?
Yeah, go ahead.
That was then, but now we are both helping teach Sunday school.
Mhm.
I really had a burden for, besides the children, when other people came in and were able to take care of the children's program, I saw the group of girls who were growing out of the children's program, and there was nothing for them. And I saw how so many Mexican girls, when they're about 13, 14, 15, they go off with a guy and get pregnant, and their life is over as a child, and suddenly they're caught in that same vicious cycle. So I wanted to provide something for these girls in the church so that they didn't have to go for that option. And I began a Sunday school class for them, and some of the other women from the church helped me. We had some volunteers who came down from San Diego. And I remember one of the materials that I used was Dr. Dobson's Preparing for Adolescence. So we had maybe a dozen girls who would come on a fairly frequent basis, ages 9 to 14. And now that's expanded a bit with some of the guys have joined because there was nothing for them. I didn't want to have guys in my class, but because there had been some real troublemakers, and we tried it before. But
It's worked out.
It's
Okay.
worked out well.
And now it's worked out.
And now I feel like my time as that teacher is coming to a close, and there's other people who are capable of taking it if I would get out of the way. So I think it's maybe time for a transition there.
Yeah. And you're trying to phase out.
Right. And it's been good when we've been out of town for a weekend to find other people to substitute and to discover there is a lot of leadership potential and people who have a heart for teaching.
And I teach the adult Sunday school class, and Juan teaches it with me, and he makes up for my lack of fluency when I don't know what to say in Spanish. It's really good to work together with him. We can study. We usually study the Bible in different chapters of different books, and then after we go through it all, then Juan can comment on it, and then we break up into groups where the people in the church can encourage each other in their daily life. I'm trying to make some sort of accountability or some sort of support group in the church itself with the adult Sunday school class.
We did a class on marriage using some of Dennis Rainey's materials, Marriage Life
Mhm.
Conference. We did a home builders Bible study on God's blueprint for marriage. And that was a really good class for us to teach as a couple.
Mhm.
And also I felt like there's a tremendous need for teaching on what the Bible has to say about marriages, and not just knowing it, but having a chance to put it into practice. So that was a good class. We team taught.
Mhm.
Yes?
Yes.
Are you saying-
Not me.
Okay, well, go into your group.
Oh, that does remind me, though. Wednesday night, Juan says there's a leaders meeting after our meeting.
Okay. I like it when he does it that way. Okay.
Great.
Maybe we can arrange babysitting. Something like that.
Okay, now, we're going to introduce this idea, and there are two things that I want you to do as you introduce it. One is talk about your change from the administrator of the rehab center. Dan's taking that over more. You're really trying to do some other things for a couple of reasons. For the purpose, legalizing the rehab center or with problems, but also to put together this fraternity of pastors so that there's a fellowship of interdependent pastors here. And there are a bunch of people who are involved with you in this. This person, this person, this person, this person, this person. I want you to mention them all right away. Then we'll stop kind of mentally. We'll go back and we'll give an introduction to each one of these people. Even if we don't really present each person in the film, we'll have a little introduction about who they are, what they're about, relationship with you, or their gifts, something like that. Okay.
And I think also you might mention that could have been inspired by the example of church unity building in Colombia. You know, through the LAM emphasis on bringing churches to work together.
Mhm.
Did it grow out of that?
Well, a lot.
Does he need to sit up now?
Yeah, you probably should.
Okay.
Make sure you talk loud too.
Okay. When I did join LAM, it was a time when my vision expanded.
Okay, sink down.
Okay.
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 Make up.
Okay. Make up. Okay. When I joined LAM, my vision did expand, and before I was still kind of working like an independent missionary, even though I was working for Spectrum. sort of gave me my own head to work in my own area. And so when I joined a larger mission like LAM that had sort of a global strategy, and I began to look further than just my own ministry. I was looking to the whole city, and then to the whole country, and then to the whole world, and it kind of was good to pull me out of just my little mindset in drug rehab, to see a bigger picture of need. And one of the big things with LAM is that churches need to work together from different denominations, that like the Lutherans, like a big painting project, and the Lutherans might have the paint brushes, and the Methodists might have the paint, and the Baptists might have the ladders, and that to get the job done, you have to get all those people working together. Not that you should ignore some real basic traditional feelings and traditions that each group might hold to, but that basically you still, with people that were evangelical, that believed the gospel, you could at least pray and evangelize together, and that there was real power in unity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that was kind of a seed that I got from moving to the LAM mission, that there's power when different churches start working together. And from the rehab, with joining LAM, and recently with Dan Young coming to help me with the rehab center, I still work with the rehab center. I still work for them, and I'm still the director there. But Dan and Pastor Juan have been able to take over a lot of the daily responsibilities that I had before. And because of that, I've gotten time to work on a new vision. And what it is that we need to get the church pastors working together. We need to get the guys that are working independently, that are overburdened in their pastorates, that have a lot of burdens and that feel alone, together to minister to each other, and also to work in unison to help each other as a more of a unit than a number of separate ministries or a number of separate churches. This came as in conjunction with also the need to legalize the entity of the rehab center, that the rehab center needed a board. And so we just made the pastors the board of the rehab center. And so they're helping the rehab center. And also we're helping them. And so we started this group called the Spectrum Group.
No, the Shekinah.
Say it again.
Okay.
We're starting.
Okay, you got me, guys. We said spectrum.
Too many spectrums around.
Yeah. We started this Shekinah group, and we called this Shekinah group. And Shekinah has to do with the Hebrew word for the glory of God, the presence of God, the kind of glory that's there, I believe, when churches and Christians work together. I think that this is a good time for this. A lot of the pastors have really felt the need for unity, for at least some sort of pastoral group where they can come and pray for each other. And we have, actually at the moment, we have 6 people involved. he started out working with the Emmanuel Church up in Grupo, Pastor Juan. Then we also had worked before with another church in Grupo area, with La Roca, with
Stop. Make it a quicker list.
Okay.
With not much in it. We have, 6 pastors involved. They are this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one.
Okay.
This one.
Okay.
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 Count them off, and then we'll go take each one
Okay.
more slowly.
Okay. We have 6 pastors involved in the Shekinah group. We have Juan, we have Miguel, we have Javier, we have Lazaro, we have Eduardo,
And Chu.
and Chuy, Jesus. And they all are pastors, and many of them run ministries. Like Javier has another rehab center, one with a lot of guys in it, like 45 or so guys.
Okay. Stop.
Okay.
All right. Go back. Start with Juan.
Okay.
What's his church? What does he do?
Okay.
Just like 2 sentences for each one.
Yeah. Make a little paragraph introduction.
Okay. Juan works at the first church where we were working before, Emmanuel, and he's the pastor there. And he also helps with our rehab center, Porta de Esperanza. Okay. Chuy works with a church up in Otay Mesa, and they're a cell church. And they also have cells in the growing area of Florida where the new people are coming into Tijuana. Lazaro has a church out in that same area, and Lazaro was a missionary in Spain, and he wants to go back there again. And then we have Miguel, and he's working with the church La Roca, and he has a ministry to children there. He wants to start a refuge for street children, and he has a free school for children. Then also we have
Javier.
Eduardo.
Okay. Then also we have Eduardo, and he has an orphanage. And he also has a large heart for street children. And this is another person that's working with us, and he's the watchdog for our association. And he's working with the city, and they're giving him a house so that he can pull the street kids off the street and start ministering to them.
Right downtown Tijuana.
Yeah.
And Javier.
Javier has the rehab center out at the dam with 45 guys. And he also has a church. And he takes groups down to the southern part of the Baja, and they minister to a lot of these transient people that come from the mainland of Mexico to pick fruit in the Baja.
All right. You once told me the story about the kids getting burned down in the house, and I want to kind of focus in on children for a few minutes. And so think about this question and answer. Why do you want to start working with children? And then think in terms of the orphanage that you're building. Think in terms of the mothers who have to have daycare, the abandoned families, the economic plight that's forcing everybody to try to work. Tell the story about the kids who got burned because they had to be locked in, and maybe some of the things that these are some of the ways that you can work through the